We're nearly 15 years into the NHL's Winter Classic experiment. Although the league has had relative success with its foray into the great outdoors, the environment feels a little bit stale and could use a refresh on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my co-host and my good friend Hunter Hodies, the co-host of Locked On Penguins. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Hunter, you and I often critique the NHL for its lack of creativity, for its unwillingness to be inventive, experimental, what have you. The Winter Classic is one of the great forays into experimentation. You know, it was an NBC television executive who pitched this idea to the NHL originally in the early 2000s. They wanted to start doing this like 2003, 2004-ish, and the NHL at the time didn't feel that they would be able to do the logistics, nor would they have the marketing ability. You know, they didn't really feel like they had the foothold to do it. A couple more years go by. They go outside for the first time. The Penguins played the Sabres. And we've made this an annual tradition. It's been messed up twice. You know, COVID bumped 2021, and then the lockout prevented what ended up being one of the more memorable ones, the Red Wings and Maple Leafs at Michigan Stadium. You know, still the largest crowd to ever see an NHL hockey game. But we've kind of reached a tipping point. But I do want to say, it's not for a lack of like trying. You know, the NHL has been consistent with this. They have tried to make this a prominent and featured marquee event, but over time, you know, it just kind of lost its novelty.
Yeah, I think with this, you're rehashing the same teams, I think, too many times, Nick. I feel like that's the thing. Like, for example, this game this year, Blues Blackhawks at Wrigley Field, right? We've already seen this game played at Wrigley Field before. 2009, when the Blackhawks played the Red Wings and the Blackhawks lost 6-4. I felt like that Winter Classic was so much better. I mean, the game was better. The atmosphere was better. This year, I feel like the NHL did such a poor job of marketing this Winter Classic. I had people texting me just a couple of days ago, wait, the Winter Classic is today? And I was like, yeah, it is. I mean, that goes to show, man, that they just did a really poor job, because if regular fans are not knowing that you have an outdoor game on December 31st, then what are you doing with this event? I mean, usually it's on January 1st, New Year's Day, but now you have the college football playoff. I think the NHL is probably a little bit scared going up against the games on January 1st, and for good reason, because the college football playoff crushes the ratings when it's on a single day, and the NHL would have gotten burned. But I still felt like the NHL really didn't do a good enough job marketing this year's Winter Classic. And then when you get to the actual game itself, it was terrible. I turned the game off after the first period. I mean, the Blues were just absolutely crushing the Blackhawks. I'm like, there's really no need to watch this because of how poor the Blackhawks have been this year, and how, again, Wrigley Field, it's one of the most iconic stadiums in the country. It's gorgeous. It's awesome. But we've already seen Wrigley Field once, and that game was a lot better. So I just want the NHL to kind of expand its horizons a bit more with the Winter Classic. I'm a fan of this event. I love the Winter Classic. I love sitting down to watch one outdoor game a year and to have it feel like it's like some special event, because it is. It's really cool. But I still want them to broaden their horizons a little bit. You know, there's a reason why a lot of those older matchups, Nick, you know, Penguin Sabres, for example, you know, Rangers Flyers, that game was fantastic all those years ago. You know, the game at Michigan Stadium, the Red Wings and the Maple Leafs, there's a reason why all three of those games are looked upon really nicely, because of A, the atmosphere, B, the marketing, and C, the game was also great.
So on top of that, I want to expand on that a little bit more. Number one, I do think it's an issue that ESPN and TNT both share the NHL rights, but because ESPN has college football, which obviously they care more about because more people are going to watch college football, it's harder for TNT, you know, which is a cable channel. Not everyone gets a cable channel. It's not like ABC, where if ESPN had the Winter Classic, it would have been on ABC on Tuesday night as opposed to on TNT. So that's the first part of that issue. Number two, I think the simple matter of the fact is you've kind of worn out the novelty. You know, we have seen almost all of these teams that have consistently rotated in and out. We have seen a lot of these venues. You know, we've done Fenway a couple times. We've done Wrigley Field a couple times. And then the other part of this is we've also cheapened this because we do a stadium series. We do a Heritage Classic. We haven't made this feel special in a while. And look, as somebody who's gone to a few of these, I will tell you firsthand, it's for the people that are there. You know, it is never going to have the same feeling for you watching on TV as it is in person. And we know the NHL is a gate league. You know, ticket revenue is what pays the bills around here. You know, you think about the other leagues and you compare where revenues come from. The NFL, NBA, MLB, you know, most of their money comes from their TV deals. The NHL, the biggest chunk of their pie is still people showing up to games and buying tickets. And that's why you're never going to have them take away, you know, the Stadium Series or the Heritage Classic or pull those back, because those are like $2 million gates when you can sell 45,000, 50,000 tickets for another game on top of that. And that's an extra game if you're the home team, or if you're the Rangers who are trying to get around the tax law. It's an away game, but you're always the home team for whatever reason. You know, we've kind of reached a tipping point with this because we all agree that this is cool. It's a good idea. It's a way to highlight the game, but we're not doing anything with it. You know, we're still trying to use what's worked in the past. And look, the Blackhawks had a great run. They won 3 cups in 5 years. They're undoubtedly the team of the 2010s, but I understand wanting to highlight Connor Bedard, but that's not a competitive hockey team. You know, you think about some of these more recent outdoor games. You know, last year, the Islanders Ranger game was very good. That was very back and forth, high scoring, chaotic, went to overtime. The Devils Flyers game had a little bit of novelty. Devils scored really quickly to open that game up, but we're only like kind of scratching the surface. Like, and I understand that because this is a gate driven event, that eliminates some of the possibilities, because like, the last one of these that really kind of stuck out for me was the Lake Tahoe one. But of course, that was because of the pandemic. There was no crowd. And you're never going to get the NHL to willingly say, we're not going to sell tickets to this. Because that's the type of stuff we're going to talk about later on in the third segment, as far as ideas to spice things up a little bit, is just new locales. You know, eventually when something isn't novel anymore, it becomes played out. And that's kind of the tipping point we've reached here.
Well, just look at one of the ones that still really stands out to me, and this one's a bit more recent than others, Nick, was the Stars Predators game at the Cotton Bowl. Like, that's an awesome location for a hockey game. It's a great idea by the NHL. Maybe they'll do it again a bit down the line, but that's the type of stadium that you really should be targeting. A classic stadium where 2 NHL teams come to meet and they play a really good game. And that's exactly what happened. Heck, it produced one of the greatest meme moments with Corey Perry walking off the ice with the camera just following him. Like, those moments, they live forever. So that's the type of stadium that I really feel like the NHL should be going after. And this is also a tease for the final segment as well. How about something at the Rose Bowl, man? Wouldn't that be awesome too? I know. I don't want to go too far ahead because we have to deal with this in the third segment, but maybe having a game at the Rose Bowl, if you can figure that out, that would be great. But I really think new locations and potentially some new teams mixed into there as well. Because you're right. I feel like, I get it. The Blackhawks are a very historic franchise. They had a great dynasty with Kane and Taves and Duncan Keith and all them. But right now, they're very much...
The old days are the old days, brother. The old days are the old days.
Like, I saw the St. Louis Blues absolutely crush them in the first period. And I'm like, okay, I really don't feel the need to watch this anymore, especially with the Penn State game coming on a bit later.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the more lasting memories from the more recent Winter Classics. And then in our final segment, we'll try and figure out some ways to make this event better. Coming up next. If you guys have been watching Locked On NHL for a while, or a listener of Locked On Oilers, you know I love going to events. It's been a little while for me. Me and my friends are trying to debate where we're going to get to next. There was some honest conjecture about going to Pro Bull riding tomorrow night at the Barclays Center. And if we do end up going, we're going to get our tickets from Gametime, the only app we use to buy tickets to get out to events. Gametime makes it easier than ever to get tickets for your favorite things. With their new feature, Gametime Picks, this feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we set the table for what's to come. You know, the Winter Classic is something that there's been growing unrest around for a little bit now, and it kind of feels like we've reached that inflection point where we need to reimagine this event, because you think about some of the more iconic moments in this, you know, going outdoors for the first time. You think about Crosby winning in overtime against the Sabres, the first time they ever went outdoors. We mentioned the Detroit Toronto game that went to a shootout in the snow at Michigan Stadium, where after the game they announced the Olympians that were on the two teams because that was an Olympic year, which was a cool little wrinkle as well. You mentioned the Sabres and the Rangers. That was a really good game that came down to the absolute last possession. You know, the Rangers and the Sabres went to overtime, and I think that was 2018. There have been some really cool moments in this series, and some of it, you know, there are things we can do to get a baseline. You know, like we should only be trying to feature rivalries in this series. We should be trying to feature teams that have connections to each other, you know, and we can find ways around that for some of the newer teams. You know, if you want to get Vegas in a playoffs here in one of these games, you're probably going to have to get a little creative. Same thing for Seattle, same thing for the Florida teams, but this is doable. You know, you have as much talent as you have ever had in the NHL. Let's highlight some of that. Let's highlight some of those non-traditional markets. You know, I still think about, I think it was 2014 where the Kings played, I think it was the Ducks outside at Dodger Stadium, and it was like 65 degrees, but they made it work.
No, I agree. I mean, and there are rumors that they're trying to do a game, I believe at the Marlins Stadium, Nick, for the two Florida teams. That would be a lot of fun. They're probably going to have to close the roof for it, if I had to guess, obviously, because the humidity in Florida. But that's still a new event that, if you market properly, will be good, because you look at the Battle of Florida right now, one of the top rivalries in the league. You know, Florida, they've kind of graduated to the big brother after being the little brother for a little bit. Tampa Bay, they're still a good team, but, you know, they're not on top anymore like the Panthers are right now. So I want to see something like that. I also want to see maybe, you know, the Avalanche in one of these games as well. How about a game at Mile High, man? I mean,
that's probably tough because of, like, you know, the altitude, but like aesthetic wise, Coors is a nice stadium, or like you said, Mile High Denver. The one issue about this, and something I was talking about with somebody the other day, is one of the issues they have with the Winter Classic is that it does fall during football season, and it's harder for the NHL to try and get an NFL stadium that far ahead of time to know, because where the schedule falls, how days of the week fall, you know. Ideally, you would always want to do a football stadium, because a football stadium is always going to be more seats than a baseball stadium. And you have the opportunity to get more people in the building, and you can put more stuff on the field. You know, you can do the pregame concert on the field, that type of thing. But that's the kind of the issue there. Because I agree with you. You know, the Cotton Bowl is a good idea. I think there's definitely, I definitely think that we will see a Florida game in the state of Florida, whether that's at the Marlins Stadium, like you said, whether that's at Raymond James in Tampa. You know, they have to find a way to incorporate some of their newer and more successful franchises. How about
Vegas at Allegiant Stadium? That would be awesome, considering the spectacle that you see at Vegas games at T-Mobile Arena. Seeing that at Allegiant Stadium, maybe you bring in Edmonton, for example, considering how that rivalry is. I mean, that would sell right away.
I agree with you. And look, this is all speculative, of course, because the logistics of this are the challenging part, like I was talking about before. Securing the venue is the hardest part of this because of the way the schedules fall. You know, we mentioned in the first segment that because of the college football playoff, the game got played on New Year's Eve this year. And that's a consideration because the NHL is a partner with ESPN. So the NHL is going to try and do ESPN, and ESPN is going to try and do them a solid, so they're not overlapping. You also have the fact that it is football season, and even the college football stadiums, most of them are needed for bowl games. So you have to worry about the NFL schedule. You have to worry about the college football schedule. But in an ideal world, yeah, I have been pounding the desk. I'll save it for the final segment because this is a good idea and it fits in that idea more. But it just feels like there's meat on the bone here. It feels like we're leaving stuff on the table. And that's what's frustrating about this. It's not that we don't like this event. It's that it could be better.
Yes, that's the biggest thing. Like, again, I get why they wanted to do what they did with Blues Blackhawks, Wrigley Field, iconic stadium. You want to showcase Connor Bedard and all that stuff. But we've just seen the Blackhawks in too many of these games. And especially with how bad the Blackhawks are this year, it would have been a better opportunity to showcase better teams and better rivalries compared to this. And I should correct myself. I turned the game off after it was 2-0, not 3-0, because the Blackhawks scored 2-1 and then it was 5-1 after the second period. So again, wanted to fully correct myself because I'm sounding like an idiot to start the new year here a little bit on the show. But I did turn it off after it was 2-0. But getting back to my original point, Nick, again, it's past time to showcase some more of the best rivalries. And there's another idea that I'll also say for the final segment, maybe playing in another iconic location like Beaver Stadium, Penn State. That is one of the loudest stadiums in college football. You did it for the Cotton Bowl. Something there, for example, we've already seen the Horseshoe. That's awesome. That's also one of the most intimidating stadiums in all of college football. It's getting those types of venues, something like Allegiant Stadium, like I already suggested. I just want to see some more iconic locations that haven't had the chance to host one of these games, and also getting the teams, with the rivalries to also play in that game. Because again, it's time to move past the same kind of few teams that they kind of try to interchange throughout the years.
I mean, yeah, we've had a lot of Bruins, we've had a lot of Red Wings, we've had a lot of Leafs,
the Penguins
we've had
too.
a lot of Blackhawks, a lot of Penguins, a lot of Capitals, a lot of Rangers. We need to go out of our way to highlight some of the more, I don't want to say niche markets, but the smaller markets, right, and highlight some of the teams that have been successful. You mentioned the Cotton Bowl. It's good that we're highlighting the Dallas Stars, who are one of the more stable and well-run franchises. We've mentioned Florida as being a team that we would both like to see be rewarded for the progress they've made over the last decade. I think Vegas absolutely should go outside again relatively soon because of the way they've been able to handle coming into the league and being as competitive as they have right away. I think the simple matter of the fact is that being that you have the heritage game, you want to try and keep that only for the Canadian teams, and you want to highlight the American teams in the Winter Classic and, of course, the Stadium Series. But we're going to take one more break on today's show. We come back, we're going to tackle some ideas for venues as far as matchups, a whole bunch more coming up next on this edition of Locked On NHL. So be sure to stick around. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to win. I love betting on players who will score a touchdown, how many points they will score, to overs, unders. It is exciting. This week in the NFL, some Saturday action, Browns-Ravens. The Ravens 17.5-point favorites against Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the Browns. Saturday night, Hunter-Steelers hosting the Bengals. The Bengals fighting for their playoff lives, 1.5-point underdogs. And then game of the weekend, one of the best games of the season, frankly, the Vikings going to Detroit, where the Lions are 2.5-point favorites. That should be an amazing game, playing for the #1 seed in the NFC. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who's hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And the biggest barrier for me, in my opinion, for this is, like we've established, this event is mostly about the people going to the game itself. It's about the immersive experience. It's about being out in the cold. It's about the guys on the ice. And highlighting that on television is challenging. Highlighting that on television in a way that's interesting is challenging. the NHL is trying, and trying is good. But when you have things that don't really line up, you get an apathy, and that's really kind of the feeling now, in my opinion. Like, if your team is not in this game, I feel like you don't really care. I don't feel like you're going to go out of your way to watch this. If we're playing this game like you usually would on New Year's Day at 1:00, I'm tired. I probably did something the night before. There's football on. If we're doing this on New Year's Eve, I'm getting ready to go out. I have other things I could be doing. You are putting yourself in a difficult position as far as that. But as far as the event itself, everybody has their pet projects. I would love to see Penguins Flyers at Beaver Stadium. That's the obvious one. I would love to see the Blue Jackets play the Red Wings at the Shoe. That's an obvious one. Highlighting these venues that are going to be open. That's the benefit of doing the college football stadiums in the northern half of the country, is that even if we're dealing with bowl games, there isn't a bowl game at most of those northern stadiums. Let's get the Red Wings outside somewhere against the Blue Jackets so we can highlight that Ohio-Michigan connection. Let's focus in on things like that. We've established, let's do Florida versus Tampa Bay at one of the two outdoor venues they could do in the state of Florida. Let's do something along the lines of Vegas versus Seattle somewhere outside. And then as far as like the inventive ideas, the problem with a lot of them is getting the spectators, getting the people in the building. Because, everybody still talks about that Michigan State, North Carolina basketball game that was played on an aircraft carrier like 15 years ago. And like, that's a really cool idea. And like, it looks amazing, but you're getting maybe 1,000 people to be able to watch that game. And you're not going to sell tickets to that. You're going to give those seats to people who are working on the aircraft carrier. So that's out. You could do something really outside, but again, you would need to build temporary seating. And that's an issue. One, I have suggested that it's not impossible, but I want to say it was about 5 to 10 years ago. Virginia Tech played Tennessee at Bristol Motor Speedway, the racetrack in Tennessee. I wasn't sure if it was Tennessee. I knew it was Virginia Tech. I wasn't sure if it was Tennessee or not. But something like that, where you get 100,000 people in a racetrack, and the hockey rink's going to look really small in the center of the racetrack. But that type of non-conventional, something the NHL hasn't done, that's how we keep pushing this, because we are beyond the bound of outside hockey being a novelty at this point. There needs to be more. We need more inventiveness. We need more creativity from this.
I hear you. Again, if we're not talking strictly Bristol Motor Speedway, and that was a great idea. I mean, the crowd there was fantastic. It was halfway point between Virginia Tech in Tennessee. Literally, if you compare the two schools, you do the math, it was literally halfway. You bring two schools together that really don't play each other very often. Really good, cool, and novel idea. Now, I know the NHL may not potentially do something like that, but if they wanted to expand to another iconic stadium, and Nick, you did bring up a Horseshoe, they're having that outdoor game this year, March 1st, 2025, Blue Jackets, Red Wings. That is a great idea. The Horseshoe is one of the most iconic stadiums in college football. That is going to be an awesome environment. Columbus, we all know that's where Ohio State is. Blue Jackets fans, a lot of them probably go to Ohio State. That's going to be an awesome environment. So I'm excited for that. And this leads me to my next point. You brought up Beaver Stadium. Let's do something at the Rose Bowl, man. Every time they show the shots of the sun setting on those mountains, that is iconic. It's a bucket list place to go. I don't care if it's a hockey game, especially for the Rose Bowl college football game itself. It is one of my goals to make it there for a game at some point in my life. It is a gorgeous stadium. I know, you have the weather and all that to think about. You have to secure the stadium. That is a place the NHL needs to circle for an outdoor game. You can maybe do something with the California teams. You can bring in, I don't know, Vegas, Utah, something like that for like a rivalry game. But I really feel like that's a place you got to circle. There was one idea that Elliot Friedman brought up on 32 Thoughts a few days ago, maybe a send-off game for Crosby and Ovechkin, outdoor send-off game at Nats Park, PNC Park. I can see that, but I would probably save that for maybe 2 to 3 years down the line. Let's highlight some other matchups. You know, we've already seen Penguins Capitals in a Winter Classic before, Nick. So that kind of goes against what we're discussing during this episode. So if you want to do that, okay, but save it for a few years down the line after you highlight some more teams that maybe haven't been in this matchup enough and maybe some more iconic locations. But again, man, you know, something like Allegiant Stadium for Vegas, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, those are two I would really circle if I'm the NHL.
So the Rose Bowl works in theory, but the issue, of course, is the Rose Bowl game has to be played on New Year's Day.
Right.
So it would have to be a Stadium Series game.
Ugh.
And it would have to be in February, where it would be a little bit warmer than it would be in
Just
January.
do it one day and then take it all apart in one day, then get the field ready. Come on. It's not that difficult. I'm just messing, but
Conceivably, you don't have to play the Winter Classic on on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Like, you could move it, but like that's kind of part of the appeal, is that it's always kind of,
I know.
That's how a tradition is established and built. But like,
or just move it back a week. Have the Winter Classic on, like, I don't know, January 8th. You can make this work. You can make it work.
There's a way to make it work for sure, because creativity and making and highlighting some different places would be good as well, as far as, you know, the non-traditional markets, which have really succeeded over the last 15 to 20 years, that have consistently built winning teams. You know, they've done outdoor games with LA, but the Kings, you know, 2 Stanley Cups. We've mentioned Tampa. We've mentioned Florida, the Stars, the Predators, you know, those non-traditional markets, being able to highlight those cities, build content around those cities. Because unfortunately, that is a driving force in this, is where can we put these games that we're going to be able to send the NHL affiliated content creators and our television partners to do features during the week so we can air them during the broadcast. You know, that is unfortunately a component in this. And look, Chicago's a great city. Love Chicago. Love Wrigley Field. You know, one of the coolest experiences of my life going to Wrigley Field. But we can send the brave reporters other places. You know, we can send them to Tampa, Florida. We can send them to Miami, Florida. We can send them to Charlotte, North Carolina. You know, we can send them to middle of nowhere. You know, highlighting hockey is the goal of this. And we've gotten away from that a little bit, but there is plenty of meat on this bone. And that's why we've dedicated a whole episode to this, because we both like this idea a lot, but it just doesn't feel the same anymore. And maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe nostalgia is the drug everybody says it is, where everything used to be better than it was, but it wasn't actually. But I don't know, man. It used to feel like a really big deal when they played these games, but now it just kind of feels like another thing that happens to be on TV.
Also, going off that, look at how the players celebrated, you know, even just a few years ago. It like felt like it meant something to them. Now, like, they celebrate these goals, but it doesn't feel like there's as much emotion to them as you saw, for example, Nick, the first Winter Classic when Crosby scored the shootout goal, celebrated like he just won the Stanley Cup. But like it had so much meaning because it was the first Winter Classic in Buffalo between the Penguins and the Sabres, and the game was also really fun. You know, I remember Henrik Lundqvist making that save in the Winter Classic, and he gave the biggest fist pump on the penalty shot after he made the save. That also was awesome. So again, it definitely has lost its luster a little bit, but I feel like they can get back to those times, you know, even the Cotton Bowl, for example, if again, you know, they get better locations, they market it properly, and you really highlight some of the rivalries that you really haven't highlighted yet.
All right, that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you guys soon.